In a world that celebrates job titles but overlooks purpose, what does it really mean to live a life aligned with impact? We're not just talking about career advancement, we're diving deep into the intersection of calling, identity, and legacy. This episode challenges you to redefine success beyond the paycheck and step into work that resonates with who you truly are. It's not just about what you do, it's about why you're doing it and who it serves. If you've ever felt like your potential was being underutilized, this conversation is the permission slip you didn't know you needed. Today, we're joined by Dr. Kristy Taylor, a powerhouse in workforce development and the visionary behind CareerCoachRx. With over 20 years of experience and a mission rooted in faith, empowerment, and purpose-driven impact, Dr. Taylor has transformed the way professionals think about careers. She's a certified career coach, author, and speaker who bridges the gap between calling and career with insight, clarity, and authenticity. In this episode, she shares her journey and how her faith-fueled mission continues to elevate voices and lives across industries.
Welcome to Impctrs Out Loud. I'm your host, Tracy B. Allen. Impctrs Out Loud is where social impact meets strategy, spotlighting trailblazing entrepreneurs, their challenges, and the revolutionary innovations driving real change. Each week, we dive into powerful stories, strategies, and insight to inspire and equip those passionate about making an impact through business.
Okay, hey everyone, and welcome to Impctrs Out Loud. Today I have with me Dr. Kristy Taylor, and she is going to be here to talk to us about your career strategy, the prescription for resilience, right? Prescription for resilience and mindset for people who work in the social impact profession. And we know that they're under a lot of pressure to perform well because they have dedicated their lives to helping communities, right? And sometimes that could be a lot of pressure and a lot less pay than they would get in a corporate setting. So she's going to talk to us about some strategies and some tips and all the things social impact and the people who choose to work in this profession. So Dr. Kristy, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your cocktail is?
So in terms of my cocktail, so first of all, my name is Dr. Kristy Taylor, career and executive coach, founder of Work Solutions, and we spelled that WORXK.
I loved it. When I saw that, yeah.
I've been in this work for about 10 years, but my background is in healthcare. So when we started talking about social impact and making a difference, my background is in healthcare. When I relaunched my business in 2022 as Work Solutions, we were using the RX, right, as part of this mantra. Sometime around 2023, late 2023, I decided, listen, people in healthcare are not the only social impactors that are experiencing these dynamics, right, where we're burnt out, we're dealing with passion fatigue, which is, to me, is a little bit different from burnout because, and we're going to talk about that, right, it's a heart-centered type of burnout. But I've covered these sectors in my career where I'm working in education, working in nonprofit, even in the military. And I can tell you, for any of us who work in social impact, we are dealing with a limited amount of resources, money, time, right? We're always kind of working with our back up against the wall in any of that arena. So late 2023, I decided to expand my business and take that RX that's in work and say, we're going to be the prescription for change. We're going to be the prescription for career success. And really what motivated me, when you talk about my cocktail, what motivated me to do this work was having some not so great experiences myself within the workforce. I've always had a passion for championing people, supporting people, career coaching. But when you work in environments where we're here to do the work of social impact, and we're here and we're working against all of these constraints and pressure, right? to work in a hostile work environment, an environment that's really not conducive. In other words, we're here for social impact, but maybe the way that we are operating as an organization internally, right, is having a negative impact on the lives of the people who work there. And I'm like, we can't continue to do this. We have to make sure that we are teaching people who are working in this space and supporting them and championing them to reach their highest level of potential. That, so I'm twofold. One, I work with people one-on-one, right, to help them reach their career goals, and we focus on mindset. But the other piece of that is, I say, workplace resiliency, because I feel like those of us who work in this nonprofit sector, that we deserve these spaces that are supportive. Basically, we're championing and we're trying to do this work for the greater good on the outside. But if the inside of the organization is not functioning well, right, it's gonna leak out. We were talking about organizational culture. Look at me trying to do this interview with my glasses off. Can't see a thing.
Girl, put on your glasses. I've tried it too. It doesn't work. I'm like, we're just gonna have to see the reflection. It's not gonna work. Yeah. I think it's a situation of the fish rottens from the head down. If you don't have good leaders in your social impact space, people who have been trained to be leaders, it doesn't work. It creates an adversarial work environment, basically. And everybody's stressed out.
And it's not, working in nonprofit, like I say, I'm talking about all of these service-based type of things, right? So you can be working for a nonprofit specifically, or these, even in the public sector, which is where most of my work has been. When we talk about education, but to me, that's all nonprofit, because you're not getting rich. You don't go into this saying, I'm going to be rich as a teacher, or you know what I mean? So it's just like, you spending so much of your time giving back. I guess some of the challenge with this is that there's not a whole lot of, I would say, when we look from a career progression standpoint, it can be competitive, right? Because you're competing for positions, titles, spaces. Some people they're passionate about helping others, but yet you still want to be known for your work. And when people get competitive and lose sight of the mission, lose sight of the purpose of why we're here and the work that we're supposed to be doing once again, an environment that's already full of constraints and challenges, it can create a hostile work environment. And I've been in that space, I've been in that position, and I said, first of all, I don't ever want to be in that type of environment again. I don't ever want to feel the way that environment made me feel. And because I've experienced that, and because I do have a background in organizational development, actually that's kind of what really kicked off the organizational development piece of what I do as a coach, right? I said I'm going to help and champion others to do the same.
Okay. What area of healthcare did you work in?
I'm an administrator in healthcare, but
really?
The overall experiences of my career has really been in higher education.
Okay.
But I'll say this, so in the military, I started my career as a healthcare administrator. Now, that was a great environment. So I'm in the military, I was a healthcare administrator. The military helped me to really solidify the basis of my career. And I took that and got a degree, got my doctorate in health science, and I went into higher education. And that's where I worked the bulk of my career before transitioning out in 2020 and back into the public sector.
Okay. All right. So when you talk about prescription for resilient mindset, what aspects of that are you talking about? What do people need to have a resilient mindset?
Okay. So like I said, I focus on career resiliency, resilient mindset. And it's a couple things. First, I want to speak to the distinction between burnout and passion fatigue is, right?
Okay.
It's one and the same. So we all attend 1,000 workshops annually. Even I present on this concept of burnout. And burnout is kind of when, this is the health teacher in me. Burnout is when your body goes into this, what we call allostatic low. See, we're living in a constant state of, you remember fight or flight, like
fight or flight,
right? We are living in constant fight or flight because we're always on the go, but sometimes so much stuff happens to us and the stress is compounded. We move into what is called allostatic low. And that's kind of where these things are automatically happening to you, and it's happening passively to you, or it could even be happening consciously, but you're allowing it to happen and it's building up. And then that's when we get to the point of burnout, right? Now, I want you to imagine that 10 times fold, because it's one thing to be in a job and you're working in this role and you find yourself burnt out. But consider that compounded, right? When there's a hard connection to the work that you're doing, which is often what we experience in social impact, right? So when I was teaching in K-4, right, I know I was making $2 a day, right? But there was nothing keeping me from staying, working on the weekends, spending my own money to make sure my kids had a great experience, spending all that overtime, just neglecting the self-care, because I felt like the task that this mission that I was empowered to do, right? I have to carry it, see it through, and make sure that these kids got what they need. So the same thing, you talk about you being, you consulting in this space and you doing work in social impact. Those of us who are trying to be drivers and champions of change, it's heart-centered work. And sometimes we get so overzealous in a way and passionate about what we do that we lose sight of self, and that leads to passion fatigue. And so it's not just a level of burnout, you're experiencing fatigue, and it's impacting you in other ways, mentally, spiritually, because you feel like that if I take a break, the world will burn down, the mission will fall apart. Right? Yeah. So this is where we come into these conversations where we talk about resilient mindset, career resilience, because the other piece of that is a notion that some of us come not even just the everyday person. We have the mindset that I always have to be going through something to become resilient. Like life is going to happen, right? Life is going to happen. And what we need to do is let life happen and be as proactive as possible. We don't need to add additional stuff to ourselves. So when I talk about resilient mindset, I specialize in something called rational emotive behavior therapy, which I did say, I'll mention it here at the end, where I just wrote a book called The Brace for Impact Women, the 90-Day Mindset Transformation Journal. I specialize in rational emotive behavior therapy because, one, when clients come to me as a career coach, they come to me very transactionally. It's very like, Dr. Taylor, can you write a new resume for me? But they're caveating that with, I'm having trouble with my career and I don't feel like I'm being seen, or I can't get to the next level. Well, when we talk about resilient mindset, as I'm listening to them, one, I'm noticing the passion fatigue or burnout stress. I'm noticing the frustration. I'm noticing the self-limiting beliefs. And that's where I'm really going to focus in on, right? When we talk about resilient mindset, there's no need to add additional stress to ourselves because life is already stress enough. We're already dealing with all those limitations and constraints. So why are you adding additional pressures and stress to yourself? And your mindset, the way that you think about yourself, the way that you think about your career, and even the things that you are thinking, like this mission won't go on without me. If I don't do it, it's not going to get done, right? All those things that you're thinking that's leading up to the passion fatigue, you're completely burning your mind out, but you're also, from a general sense, you're limiting your own potential based on your thoughts, your ideas, and that's why when people come to me, I always go, yeah, you come to me for a transactional thing like career branding, but I ask those deeper questions because usually we find ourselves on a hamster wheel. So I would say any of us who are working in this social impact space, I want you to think about the things that you're feeding your mind. And it's twofold. One, are you feeding yourself in limiting your own beliefs because you feel like you're limited in your career potential? But two, what are you feeding yourself that maybe you think you're so passionate about the work that you're not disconnecting from it in a healthy way, and you're leading yourself to passion fatigue and burnout because you don't know how to function without that, right? Without that title, without that work. And we talked a little bit before I came on, and the work that I did, that I do in my full-time job, that I've just had to recently transition from that. But that was a heavy social impact space. And I'm talking about when the mission wasn't achieved, you would see people crying, upset because they're passionate about the work that they do. It was heart-centered work. All right. But there has to be also a level where you can disconnect from that, take a deep breath, and know that there are many elements that define who you are and shape who you are. And that's what I'm talking about. Resilient mindset is what we're feeding ourselves. So we got to write our own prescription, right? For a positive mindset, and learning to take a deep dive into, and that's why I say, I use rational emotive behavior theory, take a deep dive into those things that are keeping us on the hamster wheel. And sometimes, again, people don't always, because you see somebody, you've seen people who are gung-ho, excited, passionate, and sometimes that's a facade, or it might be genuine, but it's an unhealthy genuine. It's because they don't realize that they are truly burning themselves out on this hamster wheel. So resilient mindset really focuses on you being a high level of self-awareness, not adding additional things to your plate, learning the power of no, learning to be your own unique self, separate from this space where you work, or whatever this space that you call simply your life mission, and have some moments for you. Okay. And not, when I say not adding to your plate, feeling on like you got to take on all these additional things to feel accomplished, to feel like you're a part of something.
And not wanting to let go. They don't want to acquiesce anything either. They want to hold everything close to the chest, and that too causes burnout. I have to tell people, let it go. You cannot do it on your own. You have to let it go. Whatever your fear is, you've got to let it go and have other people help you. Tell us a little bit more about rational
emotive behavior therapy.
Yes, thank you. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it is a cognitive model of behavior therapy where I really kind of hone my expertise in. And I think the simplest way to explain it is it gets you off the hamster wheel, which I think that, from a cognitive standpoint, if you've been trained in cognitive model coaching, right, there are abundance of techniques, but rational emotive behavior therapy works this way. And I say techniques because I'm not a therapist, I'm a coach, right? And so it's really important that I say techniques. Simple example, a client from a career standpoint, someone comes to me. I'm gonna give you two examples, because one, when you're working with individual clients, someone comes to me and say, I'm having these challenges in my career, right? If you think about like process improvement, if you're familiar with any of those, like a fish diagram or the 5 whys, right? That's all rational emotive behavior therapy is, right? It is a cognitive model that gives you to deep dive into the root cause of why, and you identify your irrational beliefs. So again, if you're working in social impact and you feel like I got to save the world,
that's a real thing, though.
But I'm telling
a
you,
lot of people feel that that's their job.
And I think about now where all of this transition is going on. This is a great example of why all of these people who are working in the public sector and experiencing transition in the way that they are. This is why it's so important to define yourself outside of the context of your job. Know who you are, right? Because you might have felt like what you were doing was heart-centered work, which it was, right? But that can't be the only thing that defines who you are. It's a component. You might be being pushed into something greater right now because of being forced out. I don't know. You know what I mean? It's all about how you look at that situation. I know for me, looking at them like, okay, this is what happens. You have to move forward, and maybe there's a greater purpose for you. But burning yourself out. And I also want to. So you get to that rational emotive behavior theory techniques is where, one, we identify the rational belief, irrational belief. Then we have to challenge those limiting beliefs and mindset things, and we start to replace those. But be very conscious of this, because a lot of times when you run into people, because it is a positive psychology principle, when you run into people who are just preaching positive psychology, those are people who are telling you always have a positive mindset. Listen, we are human. You're going to have thoughts, and that's just why I love REBT, because it acknowledges the fact that you're going to have thoughts. So we recognize the root cause of how we think and why we think what we think. We acknowledge those thoughts when they pop up. We don't just dismiss them. We acknowledge them, like, hey, I see you, negative thought. Okay, I see you. All right, but then you replace it. You replace those irrational beliefs. I use that model. I have my own model, which I've unfortunately had to transition the name, but I've just moved it to the work REBT coaching model, right?
Okay.
but I'm sorry, the REBT framework. So my framework is still the same in terms of what I do. But here's the thing. This works in organizations too. And the reason why is because anytime leaders are think about the example you just gave, where you talked about people trying to hold on to things, right? The part of that mindset. It works in organizations too, because it challenges leaders to identify the irrational beliefs in themselves and within their organization that's going to that keeps this organization from moving forward. So when we talk about resiliency, that's what I focus on, career and workplace resiliency in this form through my framework for really identifying those bottlenecks, and then replacing them with feasible thoughts. So if it's an individual, we're going to work on replacing those irrational beliefs with more positive beliefs. But again, we're still acknowledging things that come up, and it allows you to work your way through this process of really achieving your potential, improving your emotional intelligence, and becoming more resilient along the way. Okay, without adding extra pressure to yourself, because you're handling the things that are already coming. You're handling the everyday stuff that life already gives you. Right.
I like the fact that you do not define resiliency as powering through it, but actually addressing the issues. And
Yes.
you have to be cognizant of what the issue is. Like you said, identify the issue and then replace that problem with some other type of positive way of thinking. Usually when I hear about resiliency, is just power through whatever it is that's
going to be
giving you
stronger.
issues. Yes, just power through it and not really identifying and figuring out what the root cause of the problem is, like you said. And another thing that I find is that by the time most people get to the fatigue stage of it all, they literally hate what they do.
Yep.
Because and it's not that they hate what they do, because they're so fatigued, they don't know what else to identify that feeling with besides a strong dislike for the profession that they used to love. Have you found
I
that
see
to
this
be
with a
true?
lot of teachers. I mean, listen.
I'm telling you from an ex-teacher
Yeah.
perspective. That's where it came from. I used to be an educator in the middle school for years. And by the time I left teaching, I thought I hated teaching.
Yeah.
And then I realized years later that I didn't hate teaching. I just hated the system of what was happening. It wasn't the profession itself. It was all of the other bureaucracies around the profession that I actually did.
That's the perfect word for it, the bureaucracy, right? Because I taught K-4, and even though I was speaking from a context of when I was working in higher education, a lot of when I talked about the extra hours, the testing, and all that, I was talking about my K-4 experience. I love the kids. I love them. But I was, the first thing when I had to make a transition a few weeks ago, the first thing I did was got a teaching license.
Really?
And I prayed that I would absolutely not have to use it. Because I'm a passionate educator, but I'm like, these things that I'm talking about and I'm teaching about, it's because I've experienced it. And I'm like, well, why would I want to, put myself, I get it. There's a need to survive and we want to have our careers, but
absolutely,
but it's just, and I think that if so many people took that into consideration, when we talk about just even the education system itself and the bureaucracy and the constraint, we have great people leaving education that were passionate, that are passionate about it, right? Same thing. I see it with a lot of my clients that I coach, they're nurses, because that's where I started, right? I mean, the number of nurses who come to me, they're burnt out, but they're not burnt out. It's passion fatigue. They have reached that point where it's just like,
and not only that, by the time they get to burnout, they have a slew of medical problems that is associated with that burnout, because you're stressed out. That's literally what burnout is. You're so stressed out. You're constantly in the doctor's office. You have medical issues that you can't identify. The doctors can't identify. And it's literally just stress. You
It
know?
is. It's that allostatic load that I'm talking about, where it's just like all this stuff is happening
Yeah.
around me, and you done kind of tuned out, and it's like, oh. I remember one time
Mhm.
I was on a TDY in the military, and I literally was so stressed out with this exercise that we were running. And I
Mhm.
was in charge. I had a key role in helping to support and lead. And then we get to the last day, and people
Mhm.
blowing up my phone. They wanted stuff I didn't even coordinate. Like, do you know anything about my plane ticket? Wait, I'm going to the going away dinner. And literally hit the side and knocked the mirror off somebody's car. Got out, made sure the person was okay.
Mhm.
I'm so tired. And I was like, I gotta go to this going away dinner to support my troops. You know what I mean? I
Mhm.
was burned out, passion fatigue. I was at the end. I'm like, I just had a car accident. You know, let me just handle the paperwork. I still got to go make sure that I go have dinner with these people, because
Mhm.
these are the folks that I take care of. And I'm
Yeah.
like, see, that was it's just like you get into this automatic mode where you're not even taking
Yes.
care of yourself.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is, an automated it's like you're working on automation, and you're just going and going and going. You're just doing the things that you know you're supposed to do, or
Yeah.
that you feel you're supposed to do, but something and someone is going to get um, left out in the process, and that's usually you and your physical and mental and emotional health in this whole thing. So I do agree with that. And working with nonprofits and social enterprises and social entrepreneurs a lot, I see this consistently. They don't want to acquiesce any of their tasks. They don't trust anybody else to carry out the mission with them. It's like this coveting of control, and that too also leads to fatigue and burnout.
Call it what it is. I mean, because we in the social impact sector, we'll just say this person is passionate about their work.
Mhm.
Really, they are a control freak.
Yes.
They don't want to delegate. They don't want to share. How are you working in these environments where you're
Yeah.
supposed to be bringing about positive change, but you don't trust the people that you work with enough to let them send an email or to coordinate a
Yeah.
meeting or be a second pair of eyes on a major project, right? So no,
No.
it's see how we soften the language up, because we're so committed to the impact that we do. But in any other corporate environment, that person would just be a control freak who doesn't want to
Control freak.
delegate
Yeah.
responsibilities, who doesn't trust.
Mhm.
And so sometimes we got to call a spade, right?
Mhm.
We're
And
just
they
using
also don't
pretty
like
language.
spending money for
Yeah,
education as well. And
yeah,
that's another problem, because if they got a lot more education around what it is that they do and how to run the internal operations of the nonprofit or whatever business it is that their social impact business that they're running, they will not end up in that fatigue stage.
that's
Choosing the
true.
right board is the first part in a nonprofit, right? So if you
Yeah.
don't have the right board, then you don't really have anybody to help you. But they want the control, not understanding that if you choose to run a nonprofit organization, you don't own it. So you don't have control from the very beginning. You've never had control.
Yeah, and
And
I would
most
say I'm
people
I'm
don't
really speaking
understand
from
that.
the standpoint of the worker, right?
Yeah, but
I'm speaking from
that's what I'm saying. That whole thing still goes back into when they get ready to hire people. That mindset trickles into how they run that part as well. When they start running their programs and they hire program directors, admins, they have to hire fundraising directors, all of that,
exactly.
that mindset, that initial mindset of holding control, definitely affects how they interact with their employees, and then those are the people who end up coming to you.
Yeah, and that's where we talk about culture
Yeah,
and strategy, right?
yeah.
I did a workshop one time where I came into this organization, and it was a nonprofit, and we were sitting around. I did a small burnout workshop, and I said,
Mhm.
when I talk about burnout, I always use, again, my approach with rational emotive behavior therapy, and I talk about being rooted in resilience, but developing emotional intelligence, right?
Yes.
So what ends up happening in those conversations is it actually becomes a group coaching conversation, because I will not let them get out of that room until we start to address some of the stuff that's happening within the organization.
Patience,
And what I
yeah.
tell the managers is, like, this is not going to be a type of burnout workshop where I'm telling you to go do yoga and meditate. Yeah, I'm going to tell you some of that. But really what this is a coaching session for the group, because the managers and the leaders in those sessions should be, and I'm also, as a facilitator, I'm paying attention, and we're figuring out these control dynamics that's impacting organizational culture. Because it, to your point, what it is remember when we talk about culture eats strategy. I don't know if you've ever heard that term.
Yeah.
But that trickle down effect, whatever that is, the tone that's being set in that organization has a trickle down effect. And if the whole goal is to be an organization of impact, again, I'm speaking for whether it's nonprofit, education, health, whatever it is, that what's happening on the inside is just like a body, a human organ system, right? What's happening on the inside will eventually leak out.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why so many nonprofit or social impact period workers are so stressed out and so fatigued and end up in the stage of burnout, where they're ready to change professions altogether and leaving something that they actually love doing.
We got to figure out how to address that, because it's just like, you know what I'm saying? And that's why we're both trying to be solutions in one way or another to this, because people come into this work because they want to make a difference.
Yeah. And that's why I said initially, the fish rottens from the head down. So if we can get good leadership trainings for the founders or the executive directors of these nonprofits, I think the people who choose to be a career, choose other career paths within those organizations will have a better outcome, because the culture of the organization on a whole will change.
True. And I'm going to say that for the public sector, when it comes to schools, healthcare, education, all those dynamics that I'm covering, it's the same.
It's the same thing. Yeah. Because, I mean, you've worked in education, and if you have a principal who is just not good at being an administrator, it's going to trickle down to every teacher, every student. The students feel the effect. The parents feel the effect. So it really does rotten from the head down. If they're not
that trickle down economics.
Yes, exactly. If they're not good leaders, everything is
this is the part of the framework that I use, with rational motivated theory. This is why I say it's not just when you do a deep dive into the construct of the organization, but the first two steps is the leader has to assess themselves.
Yes.
Because leaders do not always understand their sphere of influence.
Right.
Or you know what I mean? They don't always understand their sphere of influence on an organizational culture. And so, taking accountability for your impact as a leader on the organization is really, as part of the assessment process, that's the first step to kind of leading and implementing change.
Yeah. I think we covered most of the points that you wanted to talk about. Is there anything else that you want to tell us about the work that you do?
Yeah, I do. I mentioned earlier that we just wrote a book, right? So I just wrote this book, the Brace for Impact, the 90-Day Career Mindset Success Journal for Women. Has a long name, but this is the very principles that I'm talking to you about, is applying positive psychology and REBT, which is rational emotive behavior theory. And I wrote this for women in social impact. This book is by myself and a counselor. Her name is LaShonda Smith, licensed practical counselor. We wrote this because of that very thing we're talking about passion fatigue and leveraging these principles of how, as specifically for us as women, where we play all of these dynamic roles, where we're not just, and that's a whole nother podcast episode, but where we're not just these people that are working in the social impact space. We're wives, mothers, women. They play so many different roles, and it's like, well, how do you balance that? And if you're passionate about building out a space for yourself in social impact, where you still can go on and you're balancing your life and the pieces of who you are with having a career in social impact, which is, and that could again be, you might be running a nonprofit, you might be a teacher. It doesn't matter, right? You got all of these things that are pulling you. And so that's an area to focus on. And then the other last thing I want to mention, depending on what day this airs, is that we are running a conference called the Prescription for Career Success Summit, right? And we have 18 speakers that are coming in free of charge. They're going to be speaking on these very topics that we talked about today. Building a resilient mindset, goal setting, and managing your career, and just continuing to be a person of impact. You can be a social impactor one person at a time. Not everybody's the change in the world starts with the impact that you make as an individual. And I think that we have to realize that, right?
Right. When is the summit going to be?
The summit is going to be April 26th and 27th.
Okay.
And so registration is free, and we'll make sure that you have all of those links. But yeah, we have people coming in because we are committed to, which is really strange. I always say I'm a career and executive coach, but somehow we got into this space where what can we focus on to support people who are impacted, sort of like you're doing with this podcast and the work you do with consulting. But specifically with us, we've gotten to this space at Work Solutions where we're championing people through this things like this summit, bringing them to the platforms, and even our magazine, which is Work Global News, and we're highlighting change makers and just people who are really set and committed to making a difference.
Awesome. All right. So if you had to leave our audience with 3 tips and strategies for avoiding fatigue and burnout in their careers, what would those tips and strategies be?
The first tip is recognize everything taking place around you. Be conscious, right? Mm-hmm. Be conscious. Sometimes we check out on ourselves. Be conscientious of your internal and external environment. The second thing is when we talk about internal and external environment, you can't always control the external. So the first thing, again, is 1, you're being conscious of it, but 2, you're taking control of the internal and you're managing your mindset, right? You're proactively managing your mindset. And you're not limiting yourself, because that's the third piece is, right, walk into your own potential. Each one of us has the innate ability to be a prescription for change in one way or the other. You could be mentoring someone. You might change that person's life with the words that you speak into their life. Mm-hmm. So be conscious of the internal and external. Recognize that you control the internal and speak life into yourself. And 3, be committed to being an agent of change and starting where you are, and don't limit your own potential. If you recognize those things and you manage that, your career is going to go wherever you want it to go, because everything becomes limitless, right? Because you don't see any barriers. There's going to always be a bunch of external environmental factors that may have the potential to impact you, but you can rise above all that because you see it, you're conscious of it. But that doesn't mean that it limits you as an individual and the impact and the difference that you can make.
Awesome. And what makes you an impactor?
What makes me an impactor is because, 1, I'm a person who champions the impactors, right? I just mentioned here, my whole business is dedicated to helping people who are working in social impact manage their careers, supporting them, helping organizations who are doing this type of work to identify the challenges and navigate through this so that their employees become more resilient. But the mere fact that somehow I've gotten into this space where we're building out platforms to support the change that we are the change maker champion, right? That we're supporting individuals who are in these spaces and highlighting them and bringing their stories to the forefront. That's what makes me the impactor, right? And being able to change the world one person at a time by introducing the world to people who, like yourself, are making a difference.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Kristy, for being here with us today on Impctrs Out Loud. Tell our audience before we leave how they can get in contact with you and follow you on social media.
Hey, the easiest way to get in contact with me, you can contact me on Instagram, Dr.Kristy Taylor. I'm easy to find on Instagram. All our social media platforms are Work Solutions, WORXK Solutions LLC. We're on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and I'm on LinkedIn daily. You can contact me as well. On their website is www.WORXK Solutions. I have to spell it out, or you'll be typing in work WORK, right?
Right.
But our branding is pretty consistent across all of these major social media platforms. So I'm easy to find, just one click or a Google away.
Okay. And show your book again.
Okay. The Brace for Success, the 90-day career mindset success journal for women. It took almost 2 years to put this together because we started writing it when I was deployed. And it had many names. And then I just said, I'm going to dedicate this book to women. I'm going to dedicate this book to women and social impact. And again, we have LaShonda Smith, licensed practical counselor, who gives the forward for this book. So very good. And actually, they're using the top 20 on
it's
Amazon.
available on Amazon. Okay, great. All right. Thank you again. And until next time, everyone, have a great day.